Okay, the next thing we want to do here is creating that ball that's going to bounce around in breakout. So let's see how we can do that. First of all, I think I'm going to change the name of this object just because I don't. It's not really a handle, is it? It's more like let's just call it the player bar. It's a silly name, but that will do. Okay, save it. Okay, so let's create a sphere to represent the ball. Right, so change the name to ball, and I want to make sure that it's properly lined up. Right, so let's reset position. Double click on it, zoom in, and I want to make sure it's on top, directly on top of our player bar there. So I click click on the Y here, and then I'm going to change this to an orthographic view to just help me line this up a bit more so I can see, okay, it's properly lined up here. If I just keep it at 0, 0, 0, that actually works fairly well. Okay. Now we have this ball. It doesn't do much. Right, if you hit play, it doesn't, there's nothing going on. You can move your bar down there, but the ball doesn't do anything. So let's add some interactions to it. Okay, simple. Let's add a state machine, and we'll just say move. And we're going to use the same action. We're going to go back to transform and translate. Again, translate is how you would move an object. There are many different ways to move an object, but translate would allow you to directly change the transform here, which if we change the transform, you can see that it changes the position or different properties here. So use translate to change the position on the transform. And what we want this ball to do is, well, I want it to go down on the y-axis and then maybe go, let's go left on the x-axis, so it will sort of come in at a diagonal sort of angle here. So let's just do an experiment. I'm going to manually input some numbers here. So for x, I want it to go down, and y, I want it to go down as well. So let's put -3 for both of them, both of these axes, and just hit play. See that the ball moves. That might be a bit too fast for you to see, so I'm going to change that to -1. Let's try that again. Okay, now the ball is moving, but it's not interacting with the player bar, this little bar that we're controlling here. So what we want to do is we want the ball to go to sort of bounce when it touches when it collides with the player bar, right? So how do you do that? Well, let's think about this. Let's think about this for a second. When the ball touches the bar, you want it to go up instead of down. So you want to flip on the y-axis, and also you want it to go potentially. Let's see if you go down this way. Because in the axis, we'll deal with that one later. Let's just make it bounce first. So instead of going down, we want it to go, when it touches the bar, we want it to go up, right? So that also means we need to be changing the number here on the y-axis. Right? So since we have to change this needs to be a variable. So let's go to variables, y movement, and come back here, we'll use y movement. Right, so make sure that we define this for -3 again, and I want it to be accessible here. Just makes it easier, right? So inspector, check that, shows up here. Okay. And the next thing we want to do is add another state. And in this state, we'll say flip. And what we want to do is we want to flip that variable. Right, so we're going to do a float multiply. So we're going to multiply that y movement by -1 so that -3 becomes a 3, which means it will go up. Right? We're going to be increasing the y instead of decreasing it. And I want to define the event when we make the switch. Right? So that's going to happen when the ball touches the handlebar, right, the player bar. And we're going to be using the collision event. So just bear with me for 1 second. Let's give this a try. Go to add transitions. So you right click, add transition, system event, and let's do collision, enter. Connect those two. So this is saying when there is a collision, when the ball collides with another object, we'll go to this other state and we'll flip the number, and then when this is finished we go back to the moving state where the translate will again move the object for us. Now let's try that. And before we continue, I'm gonna just let you know that this is probably not gonna work, and I'll explain why in a minute. But let's try that first. Play. It's gonna go there. It just goes right through the other object. And why is that? It's because we don't have a rigid body on this particular object. Now this topic is a little bit complex, and even now occasionally I'll be a little bit confused when it comes to what can interact with what. So there are different types of objects. There are colliders that we have here, and if we click on its trigger, then this all of a sudden is no longer just a collider, it's now a trigger. And then we have this physics component called rigid body. And you can go to, I'm going to post this link here on the forum, but you can go to this link that sort of explains the physics system inside Unity, and it primarily it will talk about rigid bodies and different types of colliders. But for our purposes, what we need is, if you just keep scrolling down, there's this table here. This is collision action matrix, and this is the important one because whenever you feel a bit confused, you come here and then you can check what can interact with what. Don't worry if you're confused, because this is definitely confusing, but hopefully through making these changes now you have a better understanding. Right, so now let's click on the player bar and see what this is. So this is a standard collider. It's not a trigger, and it doesn't have a rigid body component. Right. Now what is a rigid body component? A rigid body is, you can add it here if you go to add component, physics, rigid body. And this allows this object to interact with the physics engine inside Unity. Right. So just remember that rigid body allows you to interact with physics in the game. Right. So let me remove this just for now. So we've examined that this is a collider. The player bar is a collider, and this ball is also a collider. Right. Now, if we look at this matrix here, a static collider does not interact with another static collider. Right. It doesn't. The collision detection doesn't occur. And collision detection is what we're using. If you remember, we're using collision enter, right? So if that event is not happening, then we don't get to transition to the other state. So what we'll need is a collider. What we'll need is a rigid body. So if you look at this chart, a static collider will interact with a rigid body collider. Right. Okay, so that's good information. So let's add a rigid body to the ball. And what we want to make sure that we turn off gravity, because we don't want to use gravity for now. We're manually moving it up and down. Right? So turn off gravity. And there are various different options you can tweak. Again, click on that help button will give you explanations of the rigid body component. But we're not going to go into that for now. Okay, so now let's see if that works. So according to the matrix, let's try that again. The rigid body collider will interact with the static collider, right? Okay, so that's good. So if we hit play, now it just interacted with the bar, and if we do that slowly, let's do it frame by frame. You can see that actually. Back off a bit. Right, so it's moving towards the bar, you can see that. And then we're just going to go frame by frame. Or I think I just went to the next state. Try that again. Okay. So quick note, if you click on that, that will go to the next state, presumably. Right. And if you click on this button here, it will go to the next frame, which is what I wanted to do. So let's take a closer look. Okay. Now as we go closer and closer, it's going to touch the bar. And I don't know if you catch that, but it went down to this state quickly and went back to the move state. And you can see that the Y movement is now +3 instead of -3 as we had previously defined. So now it's going upwards. So that's useful, that's good. So we've taken care of the movement on the y-axis, which is controlling the up and down movement of the ball. Let's think about how we want it to behave in terms of the movement on the x-axis, right? So sometimes when the ball hits the bar, you want it to continue going left, but sometimes you want it to switch direction and go right. And let's make that into a random variable. So basically, when the ball hits the bar, it will just randomly decide if it's going to go left or right. Let's see if that feels right. So how do we do that? Well, a quick way to do that is, well, first of all, we need to set up an X movement similar to the Y movement here, but we're going to use that for the X value here, so it's not always -1. So let's do that first. X movement, or add a new variable, and I'm also going to expose it in the inspector. And let's just open it so you can see it here. And I'm going to say, okay, -3. So when the X movement is negative, it goes to the left. You can kind of see that here. If we move it to the left, now it's in a negative position. And let's start with that. And go back to the state. And again, in the translate action, change this to a variable, X movement. Okay, now when a collision happens, we go to the flip state, and this is where we change it to moving upwards for the y-axis. But here is another thing I want to do is I want to add a random event. So it's in the state machine. So that's you can either do a search like what I just did there, or you go to state machine and do random event. So let's see what this does. Click on that question mark button, and it sends a random event after a delay. Now we're not gonna use delay, but we are going to use the random event, and I'm going to add a new state here, and this would be, I'm gonna say flip X movement, and then the event, I'm going to add one more custom event called flip X. That's just for a name for me to remember this easily. Okay, now go to flip, add transition, flip X. And I'm going to connect that there. And say the finished event goes back to move. So let me just explain this a bit. So what I'm essentially doing is, when the collision happens, we go to this state where we know for sure we're going to change the direction on the y-axis. So if you're moving down, you're going to go up. And let's say if you hit something above, you're going to go down. But what we are not sure if we want to do is, or what we want to randomize is the movement of left and right. So by adding this random event, which means when you're here, the game is either going to go to finished and go back to moving, which means there's no change to your X movement variable. So if the ball was moving left, it will continue to move left. But if the system decided to pick the other one, because since it's randomized, it's a random event, it will just pick one of the two. If it picked the other one, we'll go to the flip X movement event, where here we'll do the same thing as we did here. We'll flip the movement on the x-axis. So if you were moving to the left, then now you'll be moving to the right. Okay, so that's the setup. Click on flip, and I'm just gonna simply copy this. Right, so copy, float, multiply, and then paste it there. Make sure that we are now changing the X movement. Okay, so let's see if that works. Hit play. See, now it just moved to the right, so that's good. That means it's behaving differently. And now it's moving to the left. So every time when the ball hits the bar, you have a potentially different outcome. It's all randomized. That's not very obvious right now because we are essentially replaying the game over and over again to try out that randomness. So that's good. One way we can manually test this again is, okay, now we pause it. It just went through these states. Now we pause it, and I want this ball to come down again just for testing. So I'm going to manually change this to -3 and unpause the game. See that now it's moving left or right randomly. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with this. And now we have movement both on the x-axis and the y-axis for the ball whenever it interacts with the player bar.